Welcome to Making Stuff, the podcast about people who make something out of nothing. I'm your host, Eliza Thibault, a musician and journalist who spent years producing creative projects from scratch and paying attention to how things actually get built. On today's episode, we're sitting down with Columbia, Maryland-based musical theater playwright, lyricist, and producer Benjamin Kintisch. Welcome, Benjamin.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, Eliza. Now that we're old friends, you can call me Ben.
Okay. All right. Welcome, Ben. So today we are going to talk about your musical, Life Review, which is billed as a hospice musical.
Correct.
So there's a lot to dig into there. But before we get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in theater?
I loved playing pretend as a little kid, as I heard one of your other playwright guests mentioned. I think that's something we all did. Lots of playing pretend. As soon as I had a chance in elementary and then more dramatically in middle school, I loved being on stage. My first singing role was in middle school, the same age that I did my bar mitzvah to great acclaim, above average singer for the bar mitzvah. People get very excited.
They get excited.
Yeah, because a lot of times it's a study in awkwardness. So the kid who can sing well, male or female, but especially male, because it's unusual at that age.
Changing or might be changing.
Correct.
Yeah.
My voice changed later, which makes it easier to do the bar mitzvah because you know what's happening. Pity the boys whose voices drop a month or two before the big day. Oy vey, as we say.
Oy vey.
Anyway, so I was good at singing in synagogue, and I was also good at singing on stage. And I did well with that throughout my adolescence. But you're focusing on the theater piece. I think it peaked in high school, where I was the drunken father in My Fair Lady. I'm getting married in the morning.
Mm-hmm. You had your
after that. Oh, yeah, for better or worse, but thank you I feel heard. That was great fun, and then after that, like the next year, I don't think I got as big a role as I wanted, grumble, and then senior year, I was really being focused on becoming a professional singer in the sort of more classical realm, and young Benjamin Kintisch, age 16, 17, I was on the way to conservatory, which I did in fact pursue briefly. I went to Northwestern University as a voice major and then transferred out to, quote, regular school. So I finished college at Brown University. And then at that point, I was a college kid who had this party trick. I could sing like Upper Man, but I would only do it like wasted at a party. The other thing I like to mention, fun fact, even that during the time when I wasn't doing, let's say, high-level singing, I was playing rugby as a young man in college. I started at age 20. And because rugby comes from the British world, there's this pub tradition with a lot of singing. Okay. So I was a below-average rugby player, albeit enthusiastic, but I was a hell of a good pub singer. And so I helped to lead a lot of the funny rugby songs, Jesus can't play rugby because his headgear is illegal, and so forth. So I had a lot of fun with that. And so I always knew I loved to sing, and I always loved to perform. Just at the height of my young singing, it wasn't all the way laser-focused musical theater like many of my peers who pursued Broadway did, right? I was kind of more in that classical bent. Then I put it up on a shelf or in a drawer, whatever the metaphor is. And then eventually when I decided to go to seminary, it was more like, what do I do? I'm in my mid-20s and I'm a smart guy. And what do I do with my life? Well, I'll go to grad school. And cantorial school appealed to me because it was this interesting mix of music and Jewish stuff.
Yeah.
I was Jewishly interested. I'd gotten a Judaic studies degree at Brown. So it was interesting to me. And then along the way, while I was at JTS, was when I discovered as a young adult, I could write a song. And my songwriting journey began there.
Okay, it's JTS,
Jewish Theological Seminary.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it. Or JTSA, Jewish Theological Seminary of America.
Okay.
It's mostly known as JTS.
Okay, and where's that based?
That's in Manhattan, a block or two north of the Columbia University campus, 122 in Broadway.
Okay, and where did you grow up?
Just north of New York City in Nyack, New York.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, detected a little accent there. Okay.
Yes, I take coffee.
Yeah, coffee. Okay.
With a W.
All right. So that's a little about your background in theater, but then you're also a chaplain now, or a former chaplain?
Well, it's funny, as we record today, I have applications in for 2 chaplain jobs. So listeners, maybe by the time this airs, we can have an update. Good news. Mr. Ben has a job.
Mr. Ben.
Yeah, I guess in this role, it would be Cantor Ben or Cantor Kintisch, depending on if you want to be formal or casual. I'm okay either way. Even just Ben, if you must. Usually in the chaplain role, though, I own the clergy title.
Yeah, you got to own it. What's the point of getting a title if you're not going to own it, really?
Well, I think so. And honestly, Eliza, all joking aside, the same way I've heard from many female doctors who assert, for good reason, their right to the title doctor and their rejection of the use of a first name, for all of the reasons. When I first graduated seminary, I was a very young-looking 30-year-old. And when I got my first job in a synagogue, I was 32 or 33, but I was young, the same age or younger than the children of some of my elderly congregants, right?
Yeah.
So they looked at me and they sometimes kind of forgot to treat me like an all-the-way clergy. So I did things like kind of insist, you can call me Cantor Kintisch or just Cantor.
But not Ben.
Yeah. Right. And some disliked that because my predecessor had been more casual. And I'm like, that's okay if they were more casual, but that's not how I'm going to do it.
That's great. But I love that for them.
Well, right. And the thing is, people don't necessarily realize in the moment that they're doing the thing, how it's received by the other person, right? Like I've learned especially in synagogue and school settings, 2 places I've worked a lot, I've learned to try my best to assume good intention and react accordingly. And then once in a while, they're like outliers, people who are exceptionally difficult. And then you try to do some triage.
Right.
But let's focus on the creating piece and whatnot.
Indeed. So tell me about just a little bit about your work as a chaplain, as I believe that informs this show that you wrote.
100%. Yeah. So you're right. Being a chaplain was a major inspiration for writing Life Review, the hospice musical. I began my chaplain training when I got my first pulpit job as a cantor, a medium-sized synagogue in suburban New York City in a town called Cranford. It's in Union County. And basically, because the congregation was skewed a little bit elderly, there was a more than typical load for hospital visits, hospice visits, nursing home visits, and of course, funeral work, grief work, bereavement work, all of that. Whereas if you were working at a synagogue down the street that had more younger families and fewer older people, you would have more work, maybe like doing, I don't know, family Shabbat or something, right? In this job, I actually had both, but the work to help the older people, I had good instincts, but I didn't have official training. So right away, I signed up for the official training known in the business as Clinical Pastoral Education, or CPE. And each CPE site, or rather each program has a site, typically a hospital, an elder care facility, or in this case, a hospice. Because these small graduate level classes train chaplains in a way that's similar to social workers and therapists, right? You need several hundred hours of supervised visitations. And so 300 a year, 300 hours a year per unit, as they call it. So I did those hours in year 1 at Center for Hope Hospice, which is a large residential hospice with 2 standalone large buildings where people would move in for the final months of their life and receive end-of-life care. So there's one in Scotch Plains, one in Elizabeth, and I visited both places for between 3 and 6 hours a week. Additionally, I did some work with congregants that year. And it was during the visits to individuals and with their loved ones at Center for Hope that I was hearing amazing stories bedside, hearing amazing stories bedside. And one evening, driving home, I got on the cell phone with my wife. I said, I think these stories, they want to be songs. And she said, without skipping a beat, get writing. So that night, I opened up one of those black and white journal books, composition books, like the kind we had in school. And I started sketching a song that actually survives to this day, 12 years later. The song borrowed a phrase from my mother-in-law's poem of the same name, used with permission, called Will It Still Snow? And the idea of the song was like a kind of middle-aged person wondering what is life like after they go, right? So in the conceit of the song, the person is thinking fondly of snow and winter because she was a New England person, a skier, looked forward to winter. And so it's a power ballad, and it has since been paired with the beautiful music of one of my two main composers, Michael Miller. I do mostly the lyrics. One song out of the 16 I wrote and did the music. The other 15 are co-writes, and we can talk about that when we discuss process. But that first lyric, I shared it early on with a not yet completed melody. So it was my sort of clumsy attempt at a sort of fill-in melody. But the words were really effective in the small room of people who heard it at this little conference. Not a dry eye when I was done.
Yeah. Wait, sorry. Just, I think I missed a beat. So you wrote the song and then there's a conference. So what happened between that?
So, great question. So I was privately writing some lyrics and I didn't know what it would become. And a few months after I had begun doing these lyrics, I went to a Jewish education conference that wasn't even a musical thing, but it's known, shout out to New Cage, NEWCAJE. It's the second iteration of an older conference. Anyway, it is a Jewish education conference, but it has a lot of extra music happening. All right, so I went there as an education director who happened to be a cantor. And because I'm a cantor and a musician, I sought out music things on the program. So one music thing on this conference was a song share workshop led by my now friend and mentor, Sue Horowitz. I didn't know her at the time. I just went to her workshop. And people were invited to share a song in any degree of readiness or doneness with the premise that everyone else in the room would hear it and say something positive or just clap. And I shared it, and it was the first time I had the nerve to share any of this material with people. And based on the emotional reaction after the session was done, Sue, again, a professional singer-songwriter with several beautiful albums to her credit, she came up to me and she said, Ben, congratulations, you've created something of great power. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. That's kind of you. And she said, is there any more material? And I was like, she's like, have you written more? And I said, yeah, there's a few more songs. She said, awesome. I want you to keep writing and come back to next year's conference, and I'll give you a late night slot, and you can perform 2 songs. And I was like, great.
Yeah.
So that gave me motivation.
And a deadline.
And a deadline, correct. I think at that point was the first time she introduced to me the idea that maybe I need a co-writer. Because I think this is like on the way to the cafeteria to get lunch after the morning session, the way these things go, right? And she said, like, do you do words and music? And I was like, mostly words. And I think she saw me make a face. And she said, that's fine. You're a lyricist. You just need to do co-writes. And that was actually not long after that, she invited me that winter. She invited me to what would become this annual Jewish songwriting retreat. And I was part of the inaugural group at the point when it was very small. It's since topped out at 30-something songwriters from around the U.S. At first, it was mostly New England or New York people. But anyway, I've been there for 8 summers now. And in the very first couple of summers, I found my friend Michael Miller, who since became a major co-writer with me, and Andy Bosov of blessed memory. He co-wrote one song. Then we didn't keep co-writing together. Unfortunately, he died a couple years back. But Michael continues to be doing okay, and he and I are actually co-writing on my second project.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll have to ask about that at the end. Okay. So, at what point did you see that the songs that you were writing could be compiled together in some sort of larger work? And because I haven't seen this musical, I don't know if it's more narrative or like a series of vignettes, how it's structured.
It's a great question. So, like most beginners, I just started writing. I didn't really have a sense of how to do the big thing because I'd never done the big thing before. I've since learned by doing the thing and also like listening to podcasts, reading books, memoirs, that kind of thing, to hear that a lot of people, they sort of sketch out or outline how the arc goes. I kind of did it backwards. But I tell people my show is a little bit like Fiddler on the Roof meets A Chorus Line set in a residential hospice. So Fiddler on the Roof, because the rabbi character, the chaplain, he keeps looking at the sky and arguing with God the way Tevye does. And A Chorus Line, because there are all these kind of musical monologues where the person steps forward and delivers their life story in 2.5 minutes. The second half of our show is heavy on that style song because that's when the chaplain gets better at his job. He asks the right questions that invite the stories, and then the stories become songs. So that's the basic conceit of the show. Now, I didn't really understand how that was all going to work at first. At first, it was just like I was Ben the person, or Ben the beginner chaplain, living the experience I would later fictionalize on stage, right? So like Rabbi David Goodman is a lightly fictionalized version of me.
Okay.
And I play him on stage, and God willing, I'll continue to play the role all the way to the Tonys, and then after a year, I'll let someone else take over.
Yeah, but you gotta have step.
Gotta ride that, all the way. And there are certain aspects of his humor and his quirkiness that people who know me find very funny because they're echoes of Ben Kintisch. There are other things that are not me. For instance, he has 2 deceased parents. It's like a popular trope in fiction that the hero has dead parents. For this show, it made narrative sense because he is at once an avatar for everyone in the audience because he visits the patients and gets to hear their stories. But he is also, his journey is from novice/incompetent to beginner plus on his way, and also wrecked with grief or unresolved grief to on his way to healing. And those are 2 very important character moves from September to the following April. There's also a botanical metaphor. If you look at the website, guys, lifereviewmusical.com, you'll see a bunch of daffodils. So daffodil is in our logo. It's because in the opening scene, the main character is on his knees planting daffodil bulbs in memory of his deceased parents. We learn soon thereafter that one of them had recently died in the hospice, and then he wipes the dirt off his gloves and introduces himself awkwardly to the head nurse. Like, oh, I'm the new chaplain. And she's like, oh, I thought you were the gardener. And it's like, they're sort of funny, meet cute. But then he goes on to try his best, and he's not good at first because he's a beginner, and also because he's really struggling with the heaviness of his own pain. You know, to be a youngish guy with 2 dead parents, that's a heavy load. And I don't even need to explain the backstory too much. Like, the audience gets it, right? And the thing is, whether you're an older person or a younger person, whether your parents are alive or not, anyone can relate to being a a new person and feeling kind of inept at a job. And I think a lot of people, they access different parts of the grief narrative depending on what they've experienced in their own life.
Yeah. So, all right. So at a certain point you had a show.
Yes.
How did you like try to figure out, like, as you're putting this together, this is a really heavy topic, death.
Yes.
And how did you have the confidence to feel like people are going to want to go see this, much less like buy a ticket for it? Like,
Eliza, that's such a great question. So from the very beginning, I knew that writing songs about hospice specifically, or more broadly, death, dying, grief, loss, all those topics, was going to be challenging on some level, but also super rich. To be clear, there have been playwrights far more talented than me who have tackled death and dying many times over. One I often reference, Angels in America by Tony Kushner. Like, amazing work. Won a pile of awards, including the Pulitzer, and on and on. It's very heavy. It's lengthy. It's often presented on 2 different nights. It's tremendous. It's not for everyone because it's so big and because it's so heavy. And to be clear, there's hardly any comedy in it. It's tremendous. Now,
just to interrupt, or not to interrupt, but I'm interrupting. Tremendous, you mean in the weight of it, or it's like 10 hours long? Or
both.
It's just excellent and it's tremendous. It's great.
It is all of these things. Okay. It is epic, as in very lengthy.
Yeah.
I believe it is 5 to 6 hours long, and that's why it's done in two. It's usually done in 2 different nights or 2 different parts of a season. There have been some condensed versions, but it's a big work. And I just bring it up because, like, it is one of many works that tackle heavy, heavy stuff. One of my favorite musicals is Falsettos, which dealt with the AIDS crisis with gay and straight Jews in New York City in the 90s, early 90s. And, these works have happened, and I'm sure each of them along the way had awkward pitch meetings and meetings with producers and whatnot. And probably a lot of people said no before people said yes. Like, that's kind of the nature of working in a difficult subject matter. However, it doesn't mean that you don't want to play in that sandbox. I mean, to me, even if I wasn't a playwright or a songwriter, I think I would have a lot to tell you just conversationally or stories-wise, being a person who has trained in hospice care and elder care, right? Like, I'm a youngish guy. I'm 46, but I've spent tons of time with older people, dying people, dead people even, and their loved ones. And I think because of that experience and that training, I'm very comfortable talking about stuff that I'm aware most, let's say, generic Americans, your Joe Schmo and Jill Schmo, or Joe and Jack Schmo, sure. #Pride Month.
Right.
And Jill and Jane Schmo, they're next door neighbors in a super gay part of town. I think people are ready for tough material, Eliza. And the other thing I want to say about that is there are some musicals that are commercially successful that don't have heavy stuff. But if you start looking closely, some of the biggest and most famous musicals I can rattle off and then remind you about how there's either death and dying in there or overtones, kind of clouds of grief and so forth. I actually did a mini podcast series on End of Life University with Karen Wyatt, and we did one episode on Hamilton. We did one on Dear Evan Hansen, and we could have kept going. just focusing on death and dying and grief in these shows and how it's treated, it's very rich, and it's not always in your face, but like, let's name it. It's the ultimate drama. Mm-hmm. The ultimate drama is end of life. In fact, early on, Eliza, I had someone I was talking to about the project, and he pointed out, he's like, Ben, you can write a plot, or you don't even need to write a plot, because just by situating your musical in a residential hospice, you have built-in drama. Mm-hmm. Because people know that people only move there for one thing. Yeah. It's to die, or to be cared for on their way to die.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I picked a dramatic setting, but what's the unexpected piece is that it's a musical comedy. The conversation is very patter style. I've been told it sounds a little bit Mel Brooks or Neil Simon, that kind of thing. And then the songs, there's some very funny comedy songs in addition to the, heartbreaking power ballads and whatnot. So we try to thread that needle or do that dance of variety. That was actually one of the first pieces of advice that Sue Horowitz, the mentor I mentioned earlier, said. After she said, keep writing, she said, I have one piece of advice for you, Ben. You've shown me you know how to make a ballad that makes everyone cry. Now you need to write every other kind of musical theater song. Mm-hmm. She said, you need an opening number, you need a closing number, you need a dance number, you need an uplifting, a feel-good something. She's like, can you write a sexy song? Could you write an angry song?
Yeah.
And I took that advice to heart. I have a raunchy R&B number that was recently performed at this awesome concert we just did May 9th. And it killed, man. Like,
it's raunch?
Yeah, so the conceit of the song, it's called This Time, and it's two patients who are noticing how good-looking all the care team is. And so if you've ever, parenthetically, if you, dear listener or viewer, have ever visited an elder care facility, a hospital, yes, a hospice, a rehab hospital, any of these places, you know that on average, the care team tends to be more 40 and less than 40 plus. But even if they're all 55 and less on average, they're a hell of a lot younger than the older people they're serving. So like there's already like they're on average younger and sexier based on just demographic
differences. And not to be ageist or anything, but they're also, they're more vital as well, because, the
That's
people
right.
who are in the hospice aren't, maybe if they were doing well at 80, they'd be, sprightly.
They would not be in a hospice.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they might still be lusting after the care team.
Sure.
Because, like, let's just name it. Part of the point that's not stated in the song is just we all have a sex drive. It peaks in power at, like, the height of our late puberty and then slowly comes downhill, but it's not dead. And so in the song...
Alive.
What's that?
It's part of being alive. I mean, we hope that it doesn't
That's right.
die.
No, in fact, if you want to be, alluding to evolution or survival of the species, there's a reason why the sex drive is so powerful. It's to keep us going. So, a lot of times just because people are a little bit embarrassed about aging bodies or sick and disabled bodies, disfigured bodies, a lot of us who are healthier and younger don't even like to think of the fact that, like, old people have sex, want sex, need sex, right? But it's true, all of that. And then I take it one step further in the song where it's two patients. Let me stop explaining and start singing. You rock those scrubs so sexy. I want to rub you so good. Your onion snaps this nexy. I need you more than I should. And it goes on and on. And then on the chorus, like, this time I want me to undress you. This time I want me to caress you. This time I want to get dirty with you. And then sponge you clean. And then they do this like wax on, wax off dance with the sponges. I assure you my cast sang it way better than I did just now. That was like early in the day. But the lyric is still funny.
Yeah.
So like that's our second funniest song. The funniest is the opening number called Spoiler Alert, which I sing much better. And that's about like
Tell us.
the list of all the kinds of people who
Get my joke
who
there?
die. What's that?
I said, don't tell us about the Spoiler Alert song.
No, I won't. I won't spoil it. Leave the people wanting more, right?
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
comedy has been an important touchstone because the tragedy of it all is it's available, and maybe if anything it's too obvious. So we have to use the wisdom of Mary Poppins. A spoonful of sugar helps that medicine go down.
Yeah. So, okay, I once took a class as an undergraduate in death and dying. It was a history class. So
Nice.
it was the history of funerals in the U.S. And
Love
we
it.
talked about funeral customs and how things have changed over the years, and a little bit about how different cultures deal with death and dying. But one of the things that stayed with me is that with our media, America tends to be obsessed with violence, but sort of averse to actual death and funerals. And we don't talk about these things. We just want to kind of not pretend that they don't exist, but just gloss over them and move through them quickly. I could see how some people might be like, oh, I don't really want to sit there like on a Friday night or, going out and sit with death. It's like, it's
You're
too
coming
upsetting.
back to the commercial viability of the project.
Well, not commercial viability, but I want to ask you, from all your work.
Well, first of all, that observation is spot on.
Okay.
That people in the American public, they tend to enjoy, I'm going to call it cartoonish violence or video game violence. And I'm not talking the grisly kind like Mortal Kombat, but there is plenty of gory yuck culture out there between hospital shows and video games that show everything or war movies that show everything, right? But the truth is most of us look away at the gross stuff because of that that instinct called disgust. And I think
And
for
fear.
or
I think there's
revulsion
fear, too.
and fear. Yes,
Yeah.
yes to both.
Yeah.
I think when people but your point was that a lot of people like the idea of violent media entertainment, but they don't like the idea specifically of death and dying.
Especially in reality, not just TV.
Correct.
But yeah.
Correct. So in a lot of our unreality, let's take Hollywood comic book movies, which are so huge right now. I've pointed out in many recent interviews that yes, my topic matter is challenging, and look how many billions of dollars the Marvel, etc. movies make. And every one of them, and you can't name an exception, has one, if not 3 or 4 heartbreaking death or dying scenes, or flashbacks that reflect unresolved grief, or both. I mean, just think of Superman. He's an orphan, and like his origin story looms over him for all 5 movies. Like, it's inescapable. I think most of the superheroes are orphans, right? And if they're not, there's usually a superhero friend that dies along the way, right? So we, the American public, and maybe broadly the people who consume Hollywood and mass media all over the world, we're good with fictionalized death and dying and maybe a certain amount of fictionalized violence and gore. In real life, most of us don't want to see death and dying up close. Most of us don't want to see gore up close. In fact, I've heard smart people say, like, it is an aspect of modern American life that we have farmed out or professionalized elder care for better and for worse, such that an ever diminishing percentage of people each year see the older generation age and die. You know, like, it's very, put differently, it's very unusual to hear about 3-generation households, with the exception of new immigrant families where you have a grandparent come in along with the children. But most 2nd and 3rd generation Americans, when grandma gets too old and she needs to leave her house, you might help her move to a 55 plus community, but you don't. The family who says, come move with us, that's the exception to the rule.
Yes.
And because of that, a lot of us don't deal with this stuff until we absolutely have to.
Yeah.
So maybe because of that fact, I would acknowledge, I mean, you're a fellow creator, Eliza, and I know part of your podcast is trying to figure out, talking to fellow creatives, how people make the stuff and maybe implicitly how they make a living at it. So, like, yeah, the topic may be a little challenging, but I also think people are totally ready for it, especially if it's good, especially if it's entertaining. And I would argue that Life Review is very good and very entertaining.
Yeah. So you kind of felt, at least initially, compelled to write down an experience you'd had into song lyrics, and that grew into this project. And now, of course, you want this project to be commercially viable. But like, in addition to just having the creative drive to create this whole work and then working to promote it, as we all have to do if we want, any listeners or viewers on our project, was there an element here? Is there an element here where you really wanted to impart some lessons to the viewers based on your experience with death and dying, like what we were just talking about with,
yes,
it can be scary, it can be upsetting, it can be uncomfortable
Absolutely.
to walk into a hospital or hospice. Are there things like maybe people don't know that they need to know about that experience?
Totally. Yeah. So Eliza, I hear you kind of asking, like, are there lessons I'm trying to teach along the way in addition to keeping it commercially viable? And absolutely, if anything, I had to be cautious not to be too didactic, right? One of the ways I pay my rent is I'm a teacher. I just finished up a 4-year run as a music teacher at a nice private school in College Park, Maryland.
Great. I'm returning to teaching music this fall.
Oh,
To
exciting.
music teachers.
Yay, music teachers,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to support this project and my family by growing my private music studio
Great.
here on the other side of this wall.
Perfect.
So I have teaching impulses because I'm literally a teacher and a quite good one.
If you
But
do
I
so,
was
say
told,
yourself.
oh yeah, and humble to boot. But the thing is, it was a teacher of songwriting, probably Sue and others, reminded me that most people don't want to go into the theater and feel like they're going to class, right? Which is why if and when a character breaks the fourth wall and explains something that feels kind of obvious, it sort of ruins the storytelling. So that kind of technique should be avoided,
Right.
unless like the extra explanation is essential. So for my project, when I was writing, I wrote the entire script. I'm the playwright. I'm the lyricist for the 16 songs, 15 of which are co-written with music by Michael Miller and Jason Spiewak. But I wrote the entire script. I had additional help from a co-writer named Beth Broadway, who helped me do a full script rewrite.
Last
and
name.
yes, that's her real name.
Yeah.
Amazing. But the majority of the script I wrote. And I'll tell you, my first pass at it, I was just kind of like trying to get something out. And I sort of overwrote it. And there was dialogue that sounded natural and some dialogue that I think sounded clunky. And I had to kind of figure that out by hearing others speak it and read it, right? But the thing that I definitely needed to cut from the jump was essentially characters on stage explaining what Ben Kintisch, the teacher, wanted to. Right? You don't want, again, unless it's edutainment, and this was never meant to be edutainment, as opposed to like the person who writes a children's play about aquatic mammals.
Right, and they do like a school assembly or something.
And they do a school assembly. Yeah, by the way, that's a big industry for
sure.
people like me.
Yeah.
Who, if you can write a cute song, like that might pay better than a hospice musical. I hope I'm wrong, but like, yeah. So there you have it.
So well, just to complete that thought, rather than
rather than over-explain,
Yeah.
I try to have as a songwriting principle. First of all, I wrote way more than 16 songs. This happens when you write a big musical.
Cuts.
You always have some orphans along the way, so to speak. I would estimate I started at least 30 songs for a show that at this point is 16 songs, and I'm not writing new stuff.
Yeah.
There's different versions with a full dialogue, a concert version I just did, a one-man show that I tour around the country that has 8 songs and narration. That one's like just under an hour. So each iteration, the words spoken in between the songs have different jobs. Because in the full-length show that runs maybe 2:15, the full dialogue, there's all these opportunities for the dyads, the pairs, and the trios through their back and forths to tell the backstory, to share their feelings, to kind of illustrate a point without explaining, this is what happens when you're older.
I think what I'm still curious about is, like, what are some of the lessons you would want to share?
What are some of the lessons I want to share?
Whether they're in this musical or not.
I would say some of these lessons can be found implied in the songs or the dialogue in the play, and some I'm just offering as Ben Kintisch, Chaplain. For one, life is precious and life is finite. And because life is finite, it is precious. That sounds trite, but one of the clarifying aspects of working in a hospice is spending time with people whose time is limited. You know, not every person in the hospice is non-communicative. This surprises people. Some people can make it to their dying days and talk nearly to the end, depending on their condition. Others you meet as a chaplain and they're non-communicative from the first time you meet them, in which case you minister to their +1. Or play some quiet music if you're visiting them alone. But I'll tell you, when I began this journey as a 30-something guy, I presented as very young and very healthy in an environment full of older people and dying people, right? So I always noticed that contrast. And so lesson number 1 is be aware of the blessings of health and the blessings of time. Mm-hmm. Because when you visit someone who is not healthy and has limited time, you're going to pay attention to that. Lesson number 2 for me is, if you're estranged, take a look at that choice and see if you can make peace with the person in your life who you've chosen to separate yourself from. I always acknowledge when giving this advice that people make choices for different reasons. And in some cases, being estranged from a loved one is because you love them and you didn't like them. Maybe they were hurtful. Maybe they were even abusive, God forbid. And in which case, stay away from them. Great. But I'll tell you, as a synagogue cantor and as a chaplain, more often than not, when I worked funerals, someone would come up to me, often a stranger, but sometimes a congregant, and they would say, "Cantor, my brother is here," and like point to that guy and say, like, he didn't talk to Dad for the last 20 years. Or about themselves, I haven't spoken to Dad for 30 years because of a fight we had when I was in college. Like, and some of these fights, by the way, are, I'm going to reference a slightly obscure movie. There's a movie called Avalon. If you don't know it, look it up. It's a great, I would call it like a Jewish American history, but also with some comedic elements. There's a famous scene where you have this intergenerational strife where like one part of the family arrives late and they chose to cut the turkey without him.
Okay.
And he arrives late and he says, you cut the turkey without me, with that amazing Jewish New York accent, right? And he goes, Dad, I cut the turkey. You were late. It's like, you cut the turkey. And that is the beginning of the end of the family dynasty. It was a stupid, traffic incident, right?
Yeah.
And in the movie, it's funny, but it's heartbreaking because I've seen this in real life more times than I care to report. In the movie, they don't talk to each other for decades, and then they notice it at the funeral of the patriarch. Right? Like, what a waste.
Yeah.
And so, from Hollywood to real life, I'll tell you, I've probably worked nearly 100 funerals in my life, between one synagogue and the other, and helping at hospices and on and on. Like, I've just done a ton of funerals. I've even had the honor of officiating at a memorial service for a friend of mine who died young. And, whatever the age, one of the biggest feelings that people bring into the room is the regret over lost opportunities with the person who's dead, or the world that they lived in and how they missed out on it, right? Because now you can't do it anymore. Yeah. So, I know I went on a little bit. That lesson is, it's related to number one about time is precious, but specifically, if you are currently estranged with someone and you haven't taken a look at it in a while, take a look at it. See if there's a possibility for making peace, especially if someone is getting old or sick. And then the last one I would say is be kind to your caregivers. It is very difficult to be a doctor, to be a nurse, to be an administrator, to be a GNA, a CNA, the grunts, we don't call them grunts, but they're usually women. Mm-hmm. Right, but I'm saying the people who muscle, GNA and CNAs are typically the folks who do this, as in nurse assistants. Mm-hmm. They're the people who are literally moving the bodies, changing bedpans or changing adult diapers, making sure our loved ones are fed. Mm-hmm. Those people get paid the least, and they do the most backbreaking work. I've seen people my age in moments of frustration kind of lash out at people like that. And it's so unfortunate, but it's not uncommon because, without excusing it, let me name it. It's very painful and sad to watch your loved one die, or just get old for that matter. And unfortunately, the fact of that pain, there's a term for it. It's called anticipatory grief. It's you're grieving your future loss.
Yeah.
So in a hospice, we spend tons of time helping our, let's call it families. We help our families through anticipatory grief. It's a theme of among many in my play, as in you're with the person right now and you're already in your mourning process.
Yeah.
So that's a real thing in synagogue life, in the hospice life. And when people are going through it, they are often very clumsy socially. And sometimes they lash out at their loved ones. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they lash out at the care team. So my last piece of advice, and this feels a little bit soapboxy, is be kind to your caregivers. I mean, on a related note, be kind to your clergy, because they're people too. But be kind to your doctors and your nurses and your GNAs and your CNAs, because they're people too. And they're trying to do their best through a very difficult job. I've been told by doctors and nurses who work in the industry of death, dying, elder care, senior care, all of it, skilled nursing, that my musical is very impactful to them, partially because they they feel seen, and also because, especially for chaplains, chaplain is a job that I explain on nearly every interview, because a lot of the general public doesn't really know what that means.
And for our listeners, if someone doesn't...
In case you didn't know, dear listener, a chaplain is typically a religious professional, like a clergy or clergy adjacent, like a deacon in the Catholic Church, which is a highly trained layperson, but a religious functionary who uses those skills in support of individuals in their time of need. So most chaplains in the United States work in hospitals, work in elder care facilities, including nursing homes and so forth. They hospices, residential hospices, as well as so-called circuit or community hospices where they travel, have to, by federal law, fun fact, have chaplains to provide spiritual support. And then chaplains also have funny roles in other organizations. There are chaplains in sports organizations. NASCAR has chaplains at every race in case, God forbid, there's a deadly crash. Fire departments in communities often have a chaplain.
I've wondered if airports have them, because I know airports have chapels sometimes, and I wonder if there's like any sort of staffing.
So it's a related etymology. I think the chaplain is the one who works at the chapel, but in the modern day, the chaplain is more broadly a religious functionary. Oh, I should say also typically ecumenical, as in not just their home faith tradition. Like, I'm Jewish, but I minister to people of all faiths, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and etc. In fact, it's super interesting when I meet someone of a new faith or an unfamiliar faith, and they say they want to visit, and we're Hindu. Can you help us? I'm like, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why not? Let's talk.
Yeah.
Easier if you speak English, for sure, or
right,
Spanish.
Right. I want to do a quick shout out to, you were talking about all of the hospice staff who deserve good treatment. My mom is a hospice nurse, so just a shout out to Jerry Tebow, who's a hospice nurse, and
Jerry Tebow. I would love when this recording is done for you to connect me with her, because I love meeting real life people who are involved with hospice care or end of life care. In fact, right now, I'm putting together my touring schedule for the next 18 months. And my one-man show is Nimble. And I've brought it to hospice organizations, to regional and national conferences. So, people are interested in connecting. They should be in touch. And that's going to include your mom, the hospice nurse.
Great. Well, yes. Okay. So, we talk about how you make what you make on this show. So tell us, how you make what you make when it comes to songwriting.
Sure. So it begins with one of these, a sharpened pencil, and
maybe paper.
Generally paper. I don't really mess around with digital, except when I have a good idea. A lot of my good ideas come when I swim. So then I'm dripping wet in the locker room and let's keep it G-rated. So I'm covered with a towel, and then I pick up the phone and I'll thumb it in like, song idea, You're Unconventionally Handsome. That's a song I was thinking about today in honor of myself. And it's just about like feeling good about yourself, even if you're not like Hollywood beautiful. And so I'm glad I mentioned that on camera, because I don't think I actually thumbed it into my phone. So one of the key principles is to pay attention to phrases that sound like a song title. And then I will literally pick up my phone and say, Siri, take a note. Song title. What's a song title? I mean, like Unconventionally Handsome, right? And then I might do like 3 sentences of explaining the conceit, and I'll say, song idea is, it took me a long time to feel good about my appearance, and then affirming the listener that they look good even though they don't look like a Hollywood star. All right. So it's kind of like the Christina Aguilera song, You Are Beautiful, but it's like very specific with my phrase, not hers. And who can't relate to not feeling beautiful, right? No matter how objectively attractive you are, however we rate such things. So that's the idea that I had while swimming, and then it lives in the phone safely. Then at another point, when I feel moved by the Spirit, and I want to write a song, I might pick up the phone and scroll through dozens, if not over 100 song ideas. There are certain times and places where I'm more prolific. I should give a shout out to the Jewish Songwriters Cooperative Retreat, JSCR. I'm an OG member. I've been going for nearly a decade, and I'll be back there in New England this summer. So when I'm going to be at a place for 3.5 days straight writing songs, my arm is tired because I'm writing. And if at one moment I want to write, but I don't have a song, that's when I pick up the phone and I'm like, all right, let me see one of those song titles. And then I'm like, okay, let's go with the beautiful song or whatever it is. Now that's just songs in general broadly. When I have a project, then I've learned to kind of come up with the songs within the umbrella of the project. So when I was working on Life Review, especially because I was also literally training as a chaplain, I had books that I was reading that weren't specific to Life Review, but they were specific to graduate level training in death, dying, elder care, when I shifted to that focus and so forth, right? So when I was reading all this stuff, it sometimes triggered ideas for songs. And then again, I would write the phrase or highlight it. And then when I was ready to write, I had ideas to go with. Now, second part beyond the song titles, writing itself, I tend to write fast. I tend to write prodigiously. I have a tip that I want to share with everyone. Okay. Write as fast as you can so your hand can outrun the inner critic. That's very important for me.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to go fast and then you can edit tomorrow.
Yeah.
Just to like give you a specific number, a typical song has 2 or 3 verses. I often write 8 to 10 verses worth of couplets. I'm not being exaggerating here. Like literally 8 or 10.
That's just what sometimes pours out of you? Or because you're making yourself like, let's do another one.
Both.
Okay.
And I've also found, see, if you're too precious, if you do the other way of sitting, waiting for the perfect line, you often stop yourself before you can start. It's the reason, if you ever watch, I know people have all kinds of feelings about Taylor Swift. In our family, we love her very much. My daughter spent like half her bat mitzvah money to go to the Eras tour in London, and it's a decision she'll probably feel good about for the rest of her life. Now, if you watch one of the documentaries about Taylor, you'll see she has books all the time. She's always scribbling, and then when she does these co-writes, she opens the books and looks for something good. So that brings us to the next key thing, which is about the co-writing. So I mentioned in the other part of our conversation, Eliza, I wrote 16 lyrics. I co-wrote 15 songs. So for 15 songs, I had the words, I didn't have the melody, and we tackled it 2 ways. One was in person, and I think 4, maybe 5 out of the 15 were in-person co-writes at the piano with my friend. Most of them, though, were so-called pen pal writes. So the in-person writes are the way people do it in Nashville, right, where they make an appointment. Mm-hmm. And I think the person usually, who's the lyricist, usually has their book available with ideas or the memos from their phone. But when you do the pen pal style, that was how the majority of my songs got done. And honestly, like, it took a lot of patience. It's part of how I answer, how does it take a decade to write a musical? Well, pen pal co-writes helps you to take 3 years to like get the first 10 songs or 15 songs
because you
done.
Keep passing it back and forth and like adding things and kind of editing.
No, or feedback. Like I had a lyric. So maybe on my end, it took me 3 to 6 months to get from song idea to lyric that was done and typed up and edited to send to Mike. And then Mike might take 2 to 6 months to give me a song back. So at that rate, it's going to take a long time. Now, of course, I good news, I did not wait all of them linearly, or it could have taken 20 years. But it's the reason why people in Nashville pay good money to go to a pretty space with a piano for appointments, because when you have, or in the case of someone like me who goes to retreats, you pay like, I dropped $700 or $800 for this retreat, and I didn't think twice about it because I know I will be more prolific in these 4 days than I will the rest of the year, mostly because I will be in person with other people.
And
whether
you're just
for
concentrating
musical,
on this thing, and you're in that environment.
Yeah,
you're not
real life.
Like, I got to take undo the dishwasher.
There's no real life. You're at exactly no dishwasher because you have a college dorm providing 3 meals with ice cream, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Love it. Yeah.
So being in person, I think tends to be more efficient, but it's not the only way to do the thing. And I know with the technology that you and I are enjoying today, in the Zoom era, so to speak, a lot of stuff is being done live from a distance. But I last thought about this during COVID. I think one of the upsides of the pandemic is so many people got more comfortable with both creating through this medium, having therapy and doctor visits through this medium, and then, of course, performing through this medium. Last night, I paid $36 to a charity that my friend runs to see a live concert. And honestly, it was really entertaining, and I was glad to give him money. And I would not have seen any of these guys but for the medium of online streaming. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the access is incredible. And the fact that,
access is incredible.
Yeah, and all over the world, too. All right, well, that is it for this episode of Making Stuff. If you found this conversation engaging or inspiring, you can find more episodes and resources at makingstuffpodcast.com. There you can also buy us a virtual coffee so we can keep the episodes coming. Thank you so much to our guest, Benjamin Kintisch. Thank you, Ben. And thank you for listening.